Welcome to JHart Modelworks. It's time to wrap up the Tomaso Pantera. Everything is painted and prepped, and all that's left is to put it all together. Welcome to my workbench. Let's get started. Our instructions have 3 steps, and we're going to skip to step 2 and start with the interior. I want to start by using a 1.2mm Top Studio rivet to simulate the ignition switch on the steering column. We want to take the head end of the rivet and stick it to some tape on a toothpick. We're going to dip the post of the rivet into some Elmer's glue and carefully place it into a hole that I drilled before painting. I've 3D printed a really nice Momo steering wheel, and we want to glue the quick disconnect collet to the back of the wheel. We can then glue the wheel to the steering column and make sure everything's nice and straight. Finally, we're going to put a little bit of glue on the bottom of the dashboard and then just glue the steering column into place. I had to make all my own decals for this build, so I included a Tomaso logo for the center of the steering wheel. We're going to set that into place, and I used the phone camera to zoom in and make sure that it was positioned correctly. We'll then finish it off with a drop of Bondic to seal in the decal and give it a nice 3D look. I've flocked the floor and the back wall in gray flocking, and I also 3D printed some 12-inch speakers and added them to the back wall as well. I'm just going to go ahead and glue that back wall into place. We'll then add our handbrake. I've 3D modeled and printed up a new shift gate that accurately matches the correct shift pattern for the Pantera. We can go ahead and glue that in place, hopefully to the car and not to our fingers, and then we can add in our shifter. We're going to glue down our center gauge cluster. We did have to print all the gauges. I've added those decals in already. And then we'll add in our pedal assembly. Let's enjoy a quick look at those beautiful pedals because we're never going to see them again. I didn't like the kit seats, so I 3D printed a set of bride seats from Blackbox STL. He doesn't call them brides, but if you look at them, they're bride Hystrix seats. I also already added the seat belts. I've shown how to do them in several previous builds, such as the Nova build before, so if you want to see how that's done, feel free to go check that out, but I didn't go into detail on them here as this is really just a quick build video. After getting the seats in, I am going to go ahead and glue the seat belts to the back wall. With the seats in, we'll add our door cards in next, and I 3D printed and added an 8-inch speaker to these as well. And once the door cards are in, we'll finish the interior off with our dashboard. And I think we're off to a good start. Alright, now back to step 1 for the chassis assembly. I've 3D printed quite a bit of stuff for this, and we're going to start with the brakes. The discs didn't come out as clean as I'd like. The backside is pretty warped, so we're going to start by gluing the calipers over the worst part of the warpage. Then we're going to go ahead and glue the brakes to the inside of the wheels. There's really just nowhere to mount these on the chassis, so we've got to do it this way. There's a metal post that is supposed to insert into the uprights and then be hammered into the wheels so that they will spin. 3D printed resin is brittle, so we won't be hammering anything. And the brakes are glued to the inside of the wheels, so I don't want them rolling anyhow. As such, we're just going to go ahead and glue the posts, the wheels, the uprights, all into one solid assembly. Once we get the pin pushed fully into place, we want to quickly make sure that we have our calipers rotated and aligned where we want them so that they'll line up nice and neat with the other side. For being so simplistic, the front suspension was rather fiddly, and I kind of wish I was an octopus because I could use another hand or two. You need to get both of these side uprights into the lower part of the suspension and hold them in place while trying to fit the upper part in place as well, and trying to get the steering rod mounted on the uprights, and nothing locks into place, so it all wants to fall apart. Eventually I went with getting one of the uprights into place and holding the upper and lower suspension pieces together, then fiddling the steering arm into position on the first upright. I could then work the other upright into the other side, and then get the steering arm to go into place on its post there, and then glue the top and bottom together to hold everything in place. All that's left for the front suspension is to put a glob of glue here in this recess and drop the assembly into place. The rear suspension was a lot easier. We start by gluing our tires onto our wheels, and then once again gluing the brakes in place. We then want to run the metal axle through the chassis, but I 3D printed a couple of round cylinder pieces that slide tightly over the axle in between the two sidewalls. Once again, because the brakes are glued to the wheels, we want to stop them from spinning. Once the axle's in place, I slide these cylinders right up against that sidewall to keep it from moving side to side, and then do some test fitting to make sure I get the space from the wheels to the body correct. Once I have everything lined up, I'll add a generous amount of CA glue to these spacer pieces to lock the axle in place. With the axle locked into place, we'll then remove the wheels and permanently glue them into their positions on the axle. Once again, once we glue them in place, we want to quickly rotate them and make sure we get our brakes lined up. There's this shelf-like engine bay cover thing that is actually a part of step 2 for the interior, and looking at it, you would think these little tabs should glue into some slots that are on the battery cover, but they don't. This shelf piece just sits into place behind the interior. Another thing that I 3D printed was an oil pan from a Ford Coyote engine. I did, however, go and squash this on the Z-axis so that it was mostly flat. That way we could just glue this in and it would give us a little bit of engine detail without, being able to put in a full engine. And to dress it up just a little bit more, we're going to go ahead and add one of these 0.04 inch Protect bolt heads just to give it the look of there being an oil drain plug. On that engine cover shelf, there are a couple of circles that you're supposed to paint silver and then paint the inner circle black. My guess is it's some kind of tank or reservoir of some sort, I don't really know. But to just dress it up a little and give it more pizzazz, I 3D printed some of these oil fill caps that I designed for the 240Z build. I gave them an anodized blue paint look to kind of flash them up a little bit and then just glued those into place. For the final part of the chassis, there is a piece of interior glass that sits between the interior and the engine bay, and we're just going to go ahead and glue that into place with some Bob Smith Super Gold Plus. As mentioned in a previous update on this build, I put a lot of work into cleaning up all the scratches and damage to the windshield. Well, the rest of the glass was just as bad. We've got scratches, chips, even ejector pin marks in the remaining glass pieces. All these pieces, unlike the windshield, are completely flat. So instead of sanding and polishing all of this glass for hours, we're going to make some templates with some Tamiya tape and cut some replacements out of clear acetate. This is going to give us a much clearer finish with a lot less work, and because the acetate is a lot thinner, we're going to have less distortion and it'll look a bit nicer. Once we have our pieces cut and test fit, we'll glue them into place with some Bob Smith Super Gold Plus. It may look like I'm using a lot of glue here. I'm really not. What I'm doing is I'm adding a few drops and then spreading it out as much as I can to get it as thin as possible so that it does cover everywhere, but when I press the glass into place, it's not going to squish and ooze out and get all over the glass. And we're going to do the same process with the rear glass as well. We're going to cut a sheet of acetate to match and then just glue it into place. We are using Bob Smith because Bob Smith is a non-hazing CA glue, which means that it doesn't put off the fumes that actually fog up clear plastic like the regular CA glue does. For the windshield, we're going to use a liberal amount of Super Gold Plus in the center area where the glass presses into the roof. This is far enough back that we're not going to get any glue on our glass, but we want to make sure there's enough to get a good strong hold as this is a large piece. With the glass in place, we're going to move on to the taillights. These fit so tight that I really don't think they need glue, but I'm going to put a drop back here in this corner just in case. With the glue in place, we can then just press these firmly into place until they're nice and snug. So the front has these turn signal indicators that are supposed to be orange, but the kit just wants you to paint the insides of them silver. Not gonna happen. Using some clear 3D printing resin, I was able to 3D print some 0.4mm thick lenses, and I painted them up with some Tamiya clear orange. Just a little bit of Bob Smith in here, and we can glue these into place, and then we'll just use some tweezers to get them nice and lined up. That looks a lot better. Before we can make the body of the chassis, we need to wrap up a few last things on the interior, starting with the rear view mirror. And when I glue these into place, I like to get them a little twist so that they angle a little bit towards the driver. In a real car, the rear view mirror never faces straight back. Once the rear view is in place, we can add some of my sun visors. These are another part originally designed for the 240ZG build, but they fit into place well here, and I think they help clean up some of the roof lines from that glass mounting. These are available in my Colts 3D store. There's a link in the description where you can get these and many of my other 3D designs so that you can print them off yourself if you have a 3D printer. This is our last chance to clean up the glass, so I'm going to give it a quick go over with some window cleaner. This is one of the easiest bodies I have ever made into a chassis. There are some inner and outer tabs on the chassis on the back here. You want to slide those into place around the lip of the body. Then just give it a little tug and the chassis should drop right into place. Then you're just going to pry the front open just a touch and pop these two front tabs into place, and job is done. We're in the home stretch and we're going to start by mounting the exhausts. Now we want to add some glue to these little mounting posts and then add our tips, and you want to make sure to get them lined up so that the point is at the very top. So I'm going to go ahead and put both those into place. Once we get those in place and get the tips lined up, we then just glue them onto this little spot on the body. Repeat for the other side, and we should be done, but I really didn't care for how they looked just floating there, so I 3D modeled these little zigzag pieces, and I just added them coming off the back end of the muffler so that it looks like there's some pipes that disappear back into the engine bay. Next, we're going to glue on that huge rear spoiler. We're going to add a couple of drops to each of the 4 little mounting holes. And I'm going to put a little bit of glue on the foot of the spoiler itself. Again, it may look like I'm using a lot of glue, but I'm really not. Just putting a couple of tiny little drops and then spreading it as thin as I can so that it doesn't ooze out when we put the spoiler down onto the body. Time for some last decals. We're going to start with the Tomaso badge for the front. We're just going to put a little bit of microset down onto some aluminum, and we're going to press that into place, get that nice and flat and smooth. We're also going to go ahead and set our license plate while we've got the aluminum out. Then using our Xeron photo etch scissors, we're going to go ahead and cut this badge out, and we want to get it trimmed right up to the edge of the design. Once we get that trimmed up, we're going to add a drop of Bonding, get that spread around all the edges, and then cure it with our UV light. This is going to give us a nice 3D emblem to go onto our grill area. Put a tiny drop of CA glue on the grill, and then we'll just carefully set this in place and get it nice and straight and lined up. Now we can move on to our registration sticker and our toll tag. Now when I first did the decals for this, it was March, and the expectation was that this is going to be like a 1, maybe 2 weekend build, but a bunch of stuff got in the way, and it's now the first week of April. So my plan is when I do the decals for the next build, I'm just going to include an April one in there and just replace this registration sticker later. Just like with the Tomaso badge, we're going to use our Xeron photo etch shears to cut the license plate off the aluminum, and we want to make sure we notch up the corners, as the license plates in Texas have those rounded corners on them. And then we're going to use some of these ProTech 0.03 inch bolt heads and a little bit of CA glue. I'm just going to tap a little bit of CA glue into a tiny spot here, then moisten another toothpick and carefully set our bolt heads in place. We'll add a bit of CA glue to the mounting point here on the back and carefully set our license plate into position. And that is going to wrap up this build. Honestly, for as bare bones as this kit was as a curbside with no engine, this kit was still a lot of fun. There was a lot of added 3D printing, but I really think that helped to flush out this build and give it a lot more depth and character. I absolutely love this House of Colors Cobalt Blue from Scale Finishes over their Orion Silver base. I think it came out fantastic. The black stripe down the center as House of Colors Sparkle Candy base with a light coat of Splash Lamborghini Nero Pegaso Pearl Black. And the gold stripes are Mr. Hobbies Super Metallic Super Rich Gold. I absolutely love this color combo. I am super happy with how this paint job came out. Those wheels are absolutely fantastic. Miguel from Hobbyworks really knocked those out of the park. Thank you. A huge thanks to Miguel. Check him out. His link will be in the description box as well. We have some 3D printed Brembo brakes in there in the back, and I drilled a 0.5mm hole in each of the wheels and added a 0.5mm metal pin to replicate some valve stems. We can somewhat see the interior in there, and one of the reasons for leaving off the side windows was so that we could see inside the interior, and we've added a lot to that interior too. You know, seatbelts, 3D printed seats, speakers, an accurate Pantera shift gate, sun visors. We even had to make our own decals for all the gauges and the steering wheel. You name it, we've thrown it at this interior. We made our own 3D Tomaso badge for the front, and these turn signals look so much better with some lenses on them. We also 3D printed up some mirrors because I didn't like the kit mirrors, and these cars didn't come with side mirrors from the factory. So you could really do whatever you want. There's a lot of actual Pantera owners that have added some more modern mirrors like these. You can just make out those fill caps back there behind the driver's seat. Those look good. I 3D designed and printed some side skirts, which I think really helped to tie in that kind of off-looking front splitter and the big flat black rear wing in the back. I think those skirts really look the part. They tie all that together, and they make this a very unique looking Pantera build. To give the underside a little more depth, we added a 3D printed oil pan from a modern Mustang Coyote engine. We squished it flat and added a photo etch drain plug in there. I think that adds a little something more than just having a big empty black hole in front of a molded in transmission detail. And our little added exhaust looks a little better than just having the mufflers hanging on there too. We have our custom license plate, and those taillights came out super clean. I am really happy with how the paint came out on those. All in all, it's a fantastic build. Like I mentioned earlier, the registration date is wrong, but we'll fix that when we do the registration decals for the next build. I'll just print off some extras with some April date on them. I'll go in with a piece of masking tape, just press it down real good and lift off the current decal, put down a new registration sticker, and it'll be, right as rain. So, like I said, guys, that's going to wrap this one up. I need to go ahead and get started on the unboxing for the next one, which I'm also super excited about. I think the next one is going to be the 1970 Revell Challenger that Chris from CD Scale Models sent me. There's like 10 things I want to build all at once right now, but I think that one is going to be next. I am super stoked about that project. I'm trying hard not to start working on it before the unboxing gets filmed. As always, guys, thanks for watching and building with me. I appreciate you taking the time, and I'll catch you on the next one.